And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rachel Stockman, and right to some breaking news in those bombing threats that have been happening across America. We have learned that a suspect has been identified and arrested in connection with those suspicious packages. This is his mugshot there. You can see him. His name is Cesar Sayoc. This arrest just happened within the last hour. I'm getting information as we speak. He's 54 years old and is a resident of Aventura, Florida. Again, this arrest took place in a city called Plantation, Florida, just this morning, which is a suburb of Fort Lauderdale. I believe I have my guest on the line. You're looking at some pictures of investigators looking at the various bomb threats, this one in New York City here that you see. My guest on the line, Joseph Scott Morgan. This is a pretty big moment here that we do have an arrest in this case.
Yeah, it is, Rachel. It certainly is. And boy, what a plethora of evidence there exists now in this context. Things are going to really begin to move fast now at this point relative to the picture that will be painted just from the forensic evidence itself. I can't even begin to explain to you at this point how much tieback there is going to be. Because now we're not dealing necessarily with an unknown. We can take all of these threads that have been generated relative to all of these packages that have been sent out and tie back to a central point. And we can walk through this. We can go through this step by step. But boy, fascinating news. I really had a feeling they were going to get a hold of this guy pretty quickly.
But let's talk about this because this was a pretty quick arrest. These bomb threats or packages were just sent in the last couple of days. Can you talk to me? And of course, we don't know all of the inside details. FBI, the feds are keeping it pretty well under wraps how they went about tracking this guy down. But, you know, from your experience trying to find someone like this, how do you begin? How do you start?
Well, you start very simply. I think that probably, first off, I'm glad that we don't know a lot about it as far as what the FBI and ATF and everybody else is that's connected to the investigation is endeavoring to do here. But they would start by simply analyzing the packages themselves, the configuration of the packages, and then the devices that are contained therein. And this is going to give them a flavor for who they're dealing with. Keep in mind, they're bringing all of the resources that the feds have to bear on this particular case, the nature of it. They're profiling this guy. They're profiling him not just in the sense that we think about, say, a psychological profile, but they're profiling him from a physical evidence standpoint. Procedurally, what is he doing? What's the structure of these devices? What's the configuration of the packaging that this thing is being sent in? And as they do that, I like to teach my students at Jacksonville State that it's like a gigantic funnel that you begin to pour information into, and then as you go down that continuum, it kind of narrows, and eventually you'll come out with a decent idea as to what ballpark you're going to be in from an evidentiary standpoint, and that's what they've done.
And Joseph, we do have a couple of new details about this guy. I believe we have his mugshot. He is in his 50s, 54 years old. They arrested him in Florida. However, he's originally from the New York area, and he has prior arrests for terrorist threats. That's all according to recent reports. Of course, I'm sure we're going to be learning more about him. According to my producers as well, he was driving a vehicle that had American flags on it. And they were led to this suspect in part through DNA evidence. I imagine that was probably through what he left on the envelopes of some of these bomb packages, perhaps fingerprints or something like that.
Yeah, it would be. If they're saying, now I'm just taking this for what you're telling me right now, okay? Yes. If they're doing this based upon DNA evidence, you can collect all of the DNA evidence that you want to, say, for instance, like touch DNA or even full strand DNA evidence. but you have to have a database to go back to compare it with, or some kind of marker back in time that is a known marker. If that's what they're saying, my suspicion is that he was on somebody's radar already. Maybe.
Well, like I said, he had been arrested before for similar kinds of terrorist threats. I don't know the details, and hopefully we can get some more information about that as the day progresses. But, you know, this isn't something where he just randomly did this, right? He had had a history, had arrest, I assume had been incarcerated on some of these charges. Interesting to note, Joseph Scott Morgan, that it sounds like they are going to bring this guy to Manhattan in federal court here in order to have him face charges here, even though he mailed these 12 packages, it seems, according to prosecutors, from a Florida location. But of course, many of the locations were here in New York City, including the Time Warner Center and other areas here.
Yeah, and that is quite interesting. Even though, you know, obviously you're saying he's from Plantation, Florida, he's domiciled down there, I would assume. But yeah, you know, it's the Fed's pleasure, right? You know, because these are federal crimes that he's involved in, and you know, we're talking about weapons of mass destruction. That's part of the federal criminal code, as well as, you know, just utilizing the mail. That in and of itself is a very weighty point to consider at this point. So yeah, the feds have all manner of things they can choose from. I don't necessarily understand the dynamic of the particular federal districts and how all this plays out, but I'm sure that there's you're going to have a heavy concentration of these people that are working on this thing up in Manhattan.
And Joseph, sorry to cut you off here. I just got word too that his van, on it, it was full. There it is. That's a picture of it. It's hard to tell exactly. You see some American flags, but apparently there were some other pro-Trump stickers on there as well. I'm sure we'll get a closer look of it as soon as we can get some more details on that. But certainly this is going to be turned into, and it has already been turned into, a political issue regarding some of the president's rhetoric as it relates to many of these figures that this guy targeted, especially the news media. But again, this is going to be a very interesting story to follow, where we do want to report that they did make an arrest in this. Cesar Sayoc, he is in federal custody. As we get more updates in this case, we will bring them to you here on Law and Crime. For the moment, though, I want to turn to some of the other crime stories trending across America. All right, folks, you were just listening to some testimony from this Kristopher Love case that we've been following all week. He was convicted yesterday, and on Monday we expect the death penalty phase of this case to begin. There's the murder weapon you see right there, one of the officers holding it up in court. Accused of killing a young woman, a prominent dentist in the Texas area named Kendra Hatcher. There he is. That's surveillance. Excuse me, that's not surveillance footage. That's video from inside a police interview. I want to bring in my guest, Joseph Scott Morgan. I know you've been following this case along with me. First off, we haven't talked about it. Are you surprised that he was convicted?
No, I really wasn't. There's quite a bit of compelling evidence that we have here, and also this kind of you know, triangle that's kind of driving this thing. You have, you know, from an investigative perspective, you have a lot of connectivity that's going on here, and I feel as though the prosecution painted, for him at least, a rather dire picture, and the jury obviously believed it.
Absolutely. So we have some more footage. I believe this is body camera footage from one of the first responders to the scene. Let's take a look.
He was out on our deal earlier. He had to go to 2 more. He knows about this. Yeah. The other ones are in a different state right now. They went to go pick up a Mercer.
More breaking news in the man identified in those bomb threats and bombs that were sent to 12 different locations across America. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, the man that has been arrested and is identified as the person believed to be responsible for this is Cesar Sayoc, according to prosecutors. And according to new information we just got into the Law&Crime newsroom, he is a registered Republican. He lives in Florida, but he had also been originally from the New York area. We are getting word that prosecutors intend to bring him to Manhattan and charge him in federal court here. I'm joined alongside Joseph Scott Morgan. We're getting more information, and as this develops, a lot of focus, of course, is to the fact this guy was a Republican. And I believe we have a shot of what is believed to be his vehicle, his truck, which has, pro-Trump stickers. I think there may be one we're working to verify that has bad things to say about CNN. Does that matter in terms of him making his way through the judicial process here?
I don't know about the judicial process, but it certainly gives investigators an idea of a place to start with him relative to his background, where he comes from, kind of his mindset and worldview, and they will, when they're interviewing him, if he chooses to speak with the authorities, they will begin to press in these particular issues relative to motivations behind these actions that he's alleged to have perpetrated, and then they'll begin from that perspective to say, well, if you're motivated by all of these things, what exactly prompted you to take these next steps that really scared a lot of people, had a lot of people on edge? And then the picture will come in closer, or will come into tighter focus at that point in time.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the forensic analysis possibly done in relation to how they tracked this guy down.
Yeah, well, and that's the fascinating thing. We're so early on in this. I don't know that I can specifically address it, but I was on HLN last night, and we were talking amongst ourselves that we felt as though that I was talking to a couple of the other guests, and we felt as though that they already had someone tightly in focus at this point in time, and moving forward. Like I said earlier, I'm not surprised that they were able to pick him up this quickly. Now, he is leaving this huge trail, Rachel. Just think about it just for a second. He's created all of these little separate packages that have been cast abroad, far and wide. We've got them toward California, we've got them toward Florida, we've got them all up in the northeastern United States. And so every time one of these things is sent out, he's sending, as strange as it sounds, a little piece of himself out, as far as any kind of trace evidence that's left behind, fingerprints, latent prints, and plus DNA.
And in terms of who this guy, according to prosecutors, has targeted, George Soros, the Clintons, Robert De Niro, James Clapper, John Brennan, Joe Biden, Senator Cory Booker, Eric Holder, the Obamas, Representative Maxine Waters out in Los Angeles. And you saw a picture there of the package. All of the packages looked very similar, coming from a Florida location from Debbie Wasserman. That was the return address. Of course, it was not actually from her, but that's the return address he used. You can see there, that's the one that was addressed to John Brennan that caused the Time Warner Center to be evacuated. My question in this is, you really have got to wonder if this guy was like a lone wolf type doing this, or if he collaborated with someone else, because it looks to me he very much did this on his own. But again, I don't know.
Yeah, I was considering these devices as such, looking at these things. These things are very elementary. The nature of the construction of the things. For one, they are a pipe bomb, and I don't recall, to the best of my knowledge, that I've ever seen a pipe bomb with a timer on it. And pipe bombs are generally something that one places in a specific location where someone will come by, pick the thing up, and kind of the inertial energy of movement detonates the thing. It doesn't work on a timer. And even
from what I understand, some of the packages had white powder too. I don't know if that was just to try to cause some kind of hysteria or something like that.
Yeah, and these are weapons of terror. And keep in mind also, Rachel, that these things are not they are not massive bombs. At best, you would injure the individual. If it were in a standard configuration, you would injure somebody that was in, I heard one of the experts last night talking about this, that's very familiar with pipe bomb research. You would at best, harm people within like a 10-foot radius of where the thing detonates, if it had the ability to detonate. Most of the time,
Joseph Scott Morgan, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I believe we've gotten some new pictures. This is the van that is believed to have belonged to this man that was arrested in connection with these bomb threats. And again, we're getting some closer pictures here of the type of bumper stickers that were on the side there. We saw one that said CNN sucks. We saw some more pro-Trump bumper stickers. This is Kamana, the producer. This is the new footage right here. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like from these pictures that they're taking the van and probably bringing it into federal custody to try to examine what they can find on that van.
Yeah, they are. They're either going to take it probably to an FBI or an ATF facility, and they'll flatbed the thing. We've talked about this before on the show relative to vehicles that are involved in crimes. These are rolling crime scenes that you have. So the best thing that you can do is try to secure the vehicle, get it to a location that where you can work on it in peace and quiet, and it's not going to be touched by anybody else that shouldn't have access to it. And they want it in a controlled environment, so they're going to take it down the road. I've been involved in cases where we had bodies in the car, and we've removed the entire car down the road to a secure facility so that we could work it in a specific area. So this is not surprising. This is very standard. And you don't know what's going to be contained within the van. It's very interesting, is it not, if we think about some of these things were actually hand delivered. Do you recall that, Rachel? That they came in by courier, some of the stamps.
I did not hear that. I heard most of them went through the U.S. Postal Service, but there could have been one or two that were via courier as well.
Some of these stamps were not even canceled, so that's kind of interesting as well. So there's these things are going to, this van could potentially bear could be a delivery system.
All right, very interesting. We're going to continue to monitor this breaking news here on the Law and Crime Network. As soon as we get more information about this man, Cesar Sayoc, who has been identified and arrested and is now facing charges in relation to these 12 intercepted bombs, we will be sure to update you here on the Law and Crime Network. For now, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, we have more breaking news in that case that we're following. A suspect in Florida to be charged in connection with those 12 mail bombs that plagued the country over the last couple of days. 2 of them happened just this morning with more suspicious packages found. And now investigators pointing to this man, Cesar Sayic, as the one they believe responsible for mailing those 12 packages. I'm joined now by Joseph Scott Morgan. He's been my guest this afternoon. We are also getting some new details, Joseph, about this guy's prior arrest record. I'm going to go through it very quickly with you, but it goes back to 1991, grand theft, petty larceny. He was arrested for threatening to discharge a destructive device. That was a 2002 arrest of a felony bomb threat. Sorry, I'm just reading off my list here. And in February 2014 in Broward County, he gave false information in order to obtain a refund. This is all according to WPTV News. I know you got a chance to look at some of his prior arrest record. What do you make of it so far?
Well, yeah, it's lengthy, going back stretching back all the way to 1992, and I find the 2002 charge particularly interesting here. Forgive me, I'm reading as well, but arrested for threatening to discharge destructive device, felony bomb threat. That statute is out of Florida. He was charged with that by the Miami police. He's apparently going all the way back to 1992. He's been at some point in time domiciled down there in the area of Miami-Dade and Broward County. But this 2002 is kind of interesting. He's at least, we can have a lineage here showing that he's had at least some kind of inkling, has any relative to destructive devices. And then you kind of bring this thing back full circle. You begin to paint a picture. I'm sure that much hay will be made of this in the media going forward. And also from a prosecutorial standpoint and investigative standpoint. Interestingly enough, he has also been involved in several thefts, apparently, everything from grand theft to petty larceny. And I believe that there is actually another charge in regards to possession of a controlled substance. Interesting character, that's for sure. I think that this goes into this profile that we're talking about, that they're going to attempt to create, just so that investigators can get a better idea of who exactly they're dealing with here.
And it is also interesting to note that for that 2002 arrest for threatening to discharge a destructive device, which was a felony bomb threat, he was given 1 year probation. So obviously not even any serious jail time for that. Again, we are working here to gather more details on that. But apparently Trump is now currently speaking about the arrest now at the 2018 Young Black Leadership Summit, and he said these are terrorizing acts, are despicable, and have no place in our country. That just in from the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
I think that's certainly the tone that needs to be set. These are terrifying times. Just to reflect back, I was in Atlanta working there when the Olympic Park bombing took place, and Eric Rudolph and everything that he was involved in. And I actually saw the havoc that was wrought, and I saw the destruction. And it's I know that reflecting back all these years later, looking back at that point in time in my life, I remember even as an investigator feeling a pervasive fear. You remember he went back to the bar, the other side in Atlanta, detonated a bomb there, and then of course we had the abortion clinic bombings. And it is a terrible situation that you put the general public in. It's horrible to threaten public officials. It certainly is. They deal with things every day that people like us potentially don't have a real idea about. But just everyday people walking around living in fear, living in terror. And right now, a tone needs to be set where we can kind of calm the rhetoric down a little bit, because people are fearful right now. This guy has certainly struck at the heart of a lot of people.
It certainly is. And, you know, the fact that so many of these packages got to actually their destinations is also a bit scary, too, because, you know, post 9/11 world, we thought we had mechanisms in place, particularly at the post office, to ensure that something like an active bomb, which from my understanding some of these were, would not make it to its intended destination.
Yeah, I got to tell you, interestingly enough, if any of our listeners have never been to one of these massive mail handling centers, I've actually worked cases in those with the ME's office before, and I got to tell you, Rachel, when I walked in, I went to the biggest one I know. I remember going into the one in Atlanta that handles much of the mail that passes through the Southeast. I was astounded by the vastness of this place, and that brings us to another point. Are there other of these devices that are currently in transit? And that's what really scares me at this point. What other kind of delivery methods have been utilized? And one other thing that we have to consider here, and we always think about this when it comes to, say, mass shooting events, one of the things that always concerns me is that there is some other unstable person that is out there that is going to be feeding off of this. They're watching what's happened. They see the reaction that the public, the press, politicians have given to this, and some disturbed individual is going to see this, and you'll begin to see, here's that word, copycats.
Yeah, and you do raise a very important point, that if this man, he did appear to use the U.S. postal system, and we all know how slow that can be in terms of them sorting mail and getting mail to their intended destination. We know of 12 packages so far, and I listed off some of the intended targets, including the Clintons, George Soros, John Brennan. But could there be a potential that more of these are out there? And I sure hope that they are caught before anyone is hurt, and they are, you know, going to put anyone else in danger, because this is just such a scary, scary situation.
Yeah, it is. It's not like it's not like you're standing in the middle of a train track and you see a train coming at you. This thing comes at you from nowhere, and I'm reflective right now thinking about the first one of these that came out. Do you remember hearing the story about the person that intercepted the package that came to Soros's home? That individual actually took, if I remember correctly, maybe my memory's failing me, but that individual took that package into a wooded area adjacent to the Soros property, and they came out and worked that event out there. And
by the way, Joseph, we're looking, just so viewers aren't confused, we're just looking at his van. This is believed to be the suspect's van, Cesar Sayac's van, being transported. We mentioned earlier it has a lot of pro-Trump stickers on there, CNN sucks, that sort of thing. Certainly something, if you saw while you were driving or at a parking lot at your grocery store, I think you would notice it. It's one of those things. I do want to also mention that state we're just getting this information in, so pardon me reading it, but state filings show him, the suspect here, Cesar Sayac, as an owner and a manager of two businesses, Native American Catering and Vending in Vartech AG. We're digging more into this. Again, all of this story is quickly developing here on the Law and Crime Network. Our newsroom is busily trying to dig up information and give you the latest information. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we will continue to cover this. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. And we are continuing to follow breaking news here on the Law and Crime Network. The suspect in that major bomb scare that has really plagued the rest of the country has been identified as Cesar Sayac, 54 years old. He was arrested in the Florida area, originally from New York. We've been talking about how investigators were led to him, and we are told, according to reports, that DNA evidence actually led investigators to this man. Before the break, we are going over some of his criminal history, including some of his arrests, which included a 2002 bomb threat for which he served 1 year's probation. I want to turn now to talk about specifically the device that we believe was sent to these 12 locations, including George Soros. One was intended for John Brennan, another for the Obamas, Hillary Clinton. That's a picture of it really quickly you just saw on your screen there. We have an X-ray photo which we're working to get turned around. But when we talk about DNA being able to link investigators back to this man, according to prosecutors, Joseph Scott Morgan, talk about why that probably was the case as you look at that photo of this bomb here, and it was not detonated.
No, and my understanding is that none of these packages or devices have been detonated. So that's a massive bonus.
I'm sorry, from what you know of these bombs, could they have been detonated? In other words, was there something that would have triggered them within the actual bomb device itself, or was it something remotely that could have been triggered?
Well, as you can see, the wiring, from what I understand, the wiring is connected in some way to these digital timers that are on the outside. My understanding was, from an ATF consultant, is that those digital timers do not generate enough energy in order to spark these things, okay, if you will. Most pipe bombs have a trigger mechanism that is built in so that when somebody picks it up, the thing is going to detonate. That's what is so baffling about this, that someone would create a device like this, plug external wiring into it, which you never see or rarely ever see with pipe bombs, and then put a digital timer on it or a marker, this timing device. It almost looks like something that was created in a Hollywood backlot. The fact that these things are intact is key here, because if we take a look at that image of that device, you see that black electrical tape. I don't know how many people at home are familiar with this, but that black electrical tape it has what's referred to as a smooth, non-porous surface. And when you see this image of it, it'll have kind of a glistening appearance. It's a plastic surface. So if we apply our fingerprints to it like this, say we're handling it barehanded, you'll actually leave a print behind. Now on the flip side, you've got this adhesive side. And people say, well, what about gloves? What about gloves? It is very difficult to handle adhesives and gloves at the same time, because the gloves will stick to the adhesive. It makes it very difficult. So what happens is, in that adhesive, Rachel, you leave behind what's referred to as a plastic print. If people at home will think about touching, say, for instance, an oily surface and pulling their hand away, they can actually see the print that they've left behind, maybe even in wet ink, grease, oil, and that adhesive would be the same thing. You can actually see that without having to dust for it, okay? That could be, and look at all of that tape just on that one device that he's used. We've got 12 of these things, and they've all been sent out. These things almost appear like he sat down at one time on an assembly line and kind of assembled all these things, had all of these packages put together, and then begins to kind of disseminate these things periodically. That's fascinating here. Also, this bomb is not made, this device is not made with like a galvanized piece of pipe with caps on the end of it. That's PVC piping that he's used, which is plastic pipe. The X-rays, my understanding is that there are glass shards that have been contained or seen in some of these. Most of the time with shrapnel, which is what apparently the intent is, you'll see shrapnel wrapping around the outside of it. It makes it more effective. You diminish the amount of powder or explosive you can put in if you fill that with something that doesn't explode.
And
so,
sorry to interrupt you, Joseph. We just got in. This is an X-ray photo. Where I don't know if you can take, if we drop that graphic there, maybe you can see a little bit closer what's inside this bomb device. It's a bit hard for my eyes that aren't trained in this to tell, but is there anything that you observe in this?
Yeah, I think if people will take a look, obviously you can see the coiled wiring that's in there, and there's some kind of attachment that's indwelling as well. I'm pointing at it like you can see me do that.
Right.
But at any rate, it looks as though that there has been a defect in the end of the pipe where the wire actually passes through the end, and it goes into this area. Now, if people at home will take a look at that kind of shadowy area where you see those kind of large fragmented looking, that's not what you would commonly consider to be like gunpowder or high explosive. That might be what they're referring to as glass shards. So you can see that would displace any kind of explosive that you would have in there. So it diminishes explosive capacity or potential, because a bomb is the old saying is a bomb that doesn't detonate is nothing but a paperweight. So what you have here is a bomb that has potential explosive potential, but if you don't have a lot of explosive powder that's in there, you're not going to generate much of a pop with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we really do think, and again, we're waiting to get more information from federal authorities here, but
Yep.
we do believe that the DNA evidence what linked investigators to track down Cesar Sayoc. Obviously, his DNA was already in a database, and I'm assuming what you've been talking about, the ability to get some DNA from one of the
Yep.
bombs that they collected, led them right to this guy. And it's just amazing in this day and age here, this guy thought he could get away with something like this.
Yeah, we are more surveilled. We are more surveilled in this period of time than any time in human history, and it absolutely. We're looking at the Love case, weren't we, just a moment ago, and we had that videography from back a few years ago from the parking garage. You think you're going to get away with something like this and go undetected? It's beyond the pale. So yeah, and particularly now with technology that we have, we think about DNA. Those surfaces, I talked about fingerprints just a moment ago. They can actually go in and kind of define the environment in which he lived in. And people think, well, only his DNA would be on there, or maybe the people that this thing passed through. Keep in mind, if you don't know who this guy is, if he lives in an environment, say, for instance, he has a dog, he has a cat,
right.
He has some type of specific synthetic fiber that comes off of his clothing or off his carpet, that stuff is going to be unique to that individual. And from an investigative standpoint, that is a point of individualization that's a tie back to the origins of this thing. So that's going to be quite compelling too. I'm still trying to kind of put my mind around this idea of where did they get this known DNA sample from? If in fact they did match DNA from these devices back specifically to him, where did they get this from? What database was he in that would have compelled them to have taken a sample? That is,
yeah, because when we were looking at some of his arrest records here, I don't think any of them raised to the level where they would have had to have taken a DNA sample. But again, we don't know his full history. Okay, Joseph Scott Morgan, we're continuing to very closely monitor this breaking news. Stay with us here on the Law and Crime Network. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us. And welcome back, folks. We have some more breaking news in that case that we're following out of Florida. The Florida man has been charged in connection, well, he will be charged in connection to those mail bombs that were sent across the country, including several right here in New York City. We just got word that the FBI has warned that there could be still some of these bombs in the mail. I'm joined now by Joseph Scott Morgan. We predicted that a few minutes ago, but we just got information that the FBI does think that that is a real possibility here.
It was certainly in our mind just a moment ago, and here it is. I'm really worried that other ones are out floating about, and it's kind of unpredictable as to when these things might turn up. I'm wondering if they haven't gotten some information from him, because in one article I read, they named specific individuals that might be potential targets. So I don't know what else the FBI may have come up with, or the postal inspector, this sort of thing. This goes to this idea of, is it possible to measure time and direction relative to when these things are sent out? And this is going to be a big part that the postal inspectors will play in this particular case, Rachel, talking about how long the delivery time is and this sort of thing to kind of pin down a timeline.
Absolutely. We're going to continue to very closely monitor the situation out of Florida. We are also getting word that this man, Cesar Sayoc, will likely face those charges out of Manhattan federal court. He's believed to be involved in at least 12 suspected bombs that were sent to many high-profile Democrats across the country, including several here in the New York City area. Again, our producers are working to get more information on that. When we have it to you, we will bring it. In the meantime, I do want to turn to another top story that we've been covering here in the crime world, and that is the case against Kristopher Love. He was convicted just yesterday. He's the man accused of being involved in a very elaborate scheme to take out a young dentist in the Texas area. He was the alleged hitman. He was convicted of capital murder, and now he faces the death penalty. We have some surveillance footage from inside where the shooting happened. Let's take a look at that footage. Okay, you were just looking at and listening to testimony regarding surveillance footage in this case against Kristopher Love that we've been following gavel to gavel all week. Of course, we are here to update you on that case. It is moving into the next important phase where this man is basically going to see if he lives or dies. Jurors are going to decide whether they are going to put him to death. And the question now, Joseph Scott Morgan, is will this guy end up facing the death penalty? As we look at this case, while he was facing those capital murder charges, he was not suspected to be the ringleader in all of this. If you've been following the case, you'll know he was apparently hired by this woman named Brenda Delgado to execute Kendra Hatcher, the dentist, and he was not the mastermind, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's going to be quite compelling to watch that unfold. I suspect that considering that it's Texas, I would be I'd be hedging my bets to say that he wouldn't get the death penalty. But considering that there's so many players involved in this, and if they can paint a sympathetic picture of him in sentencing phase, I think he might escape with his life. But boy, that video surveillance is so compelling in this particular case because it really paints a picture as to what's going on. There was planning involved in this, and prosecution's really going to hammer towards the jury relative to that, to talk about how much plan. This wasn't some kind of knee-jerk event that happened. They went in to specifically take this young woman's life.
Absolutely. It's a very calculated plan, and we heard from some of the witnesses, including a co-defendant that copped a plea, Crystal Cortez, who testified to the fact that this was a very premeditated plan. This is a picture here of the victim in all of this, and her boyfriend, you just saw a picture. He also testified. The motive, according to prosecutors, is this woman, Brenda Delgado, was jealous that her ex-boyfriend was dating Kendra, the names are very similar, and wanted to take her out. We have some footage that was played during the trial. It was body camera footage from one of the responding officers. Let's take a look. And the blurred out part at the bottom of the screen, that's actually the victim's body. We didn't want to show it to you because it is just so gruesome and hard to look at. Joseph Scott Morgan, you've been following this case along with me. As we mentioned, we're going into the penalty phase of this case. The fact, though, that it was just such a heartless crime certainly is going to weigh in on the jurors when they're deciding this next phase of whether or not to put Kristopher Love to death.
Yeah, it will. And, all of this videography evidence in and of itself is compelling, not to mention the story that has been woven on the stand, the narrative that's taken place throughout that actually compelled the jury to find this fellow guilty. it's they've done I think a very solid job here. And viewers at home, along with the jury, have a firsthand view of what the police see when they arrive there, and it is gruesome. The jury was not spared. They did see these things, and they saw, how her life came to an end on that, that dirty, filthy surface there in that parking garage, and it really breathes life back into her after she's been gone all this period of time. So yeah, this is going to be a real uphill battle for the defense.
All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, we have to take a quick break here on the Law and Crime Network, but we're going to actually delve a little deeper into this Kristopher Love case and listen to some testimony from a woman who says she was part of the planning to take this other woman out. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. And it's kind of almost haunting to listen to Crystal Cortez talk about this. She obviously seems to me a little bit nervous on the stand, but methodically going through how she went about killing a woman and the planning behind all of that. Joseph Scott Morgan, what did you make of her testimony? Do you think it was pretty damning for the defense?
In a flash. She's talking about, tracking this woman for 2 weeks, almost,
stalking her,
like they're, stalking her, waiting, like a lion, waiting for the perfect time, and you can imagine, Kendra had no idea this was coming, and just out of the blue, her life is taken, and so many people involved in this, all these peripheral characters. And I think that, when the jury looks at this, they're thinking, my God, how much hatred and animosity can someone have towards one person where you can get this many people to be driven toward ending this young woman's life. So, yeah, I think that this was very impactful on the jury.
All right, we're continuing to monitor this case, especially as we go into the death penalty phase of this on Monday. In the meantime, we have to take a short break here on the Law and Crime Network. But when we come back, the latest in that investigation into the man just arrested connected with those bombing devices that were sent to 12 different locations across America. We're going to bring in a FBI expert to talk about all of this. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. All right, so that is Crystal Cortez, the suspected getaway driver who was also intimately involved in this scheme to take out the victim, that dentist in the Dallas area. I want to bring on my guest who's still with me. Thank you so much, Joseph Scott Morgan. We listened to a little bit of her testimony earlier, but she certainly lays out a motive here in this case.
Yeah, she does, doesn't she? She's compelling because she can put all of the pieces together. That's one of the problems in one of these conspiratorial cases like this. You don't know how all of the little jigsaw pieces kind of fit together. What was the compelling factors behind everything? Who initiated this? You used a term a few moments ago relative to kind of the person that is overlording the whole process. This young woman and the shooter, to a certain degree, were tools in this whole scheme, moving forward. So you've got a lot of actors on the stage at one time.
So let's now listen, because we've really laid the argument here for the prosecution, and there's a pretty clear case. We have a witness testifying to the fact that she hatched the plan. We didn't play that testimony, but she talks about how she got Kristopher Love involved and his role in all of this. But let's listen to the defense's closings in this, and what are they doing to defend this guy? Take a listen. All right, sorry about that, folks. Real quickly, Joseph Scott Morgan, I know you have to go soon. What do you make of the defense's closings here?
He he's having to, as you can tell, he's having to throw out this idea of reasonable doubt, so that, he's talking about how all of these little nooks and crannies in the parking deck and this sort of thing to try to raise that specter. And, unfortunately for the defendant, it didn't work out so well.
Yep, absolutely. Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. As you said, it didn't work out so well for the defendant. He's now facing the death penalty phase of this trial, which we're going to stream here live on the Law and Crime Network. Thanks again, as always, for joining us. We're going to take a quick break here on Law and Crime, but when we come back, we'll update you on that Florida bombing suspect. Stay with us.